So for anyone who has watched this channel over the last, say, 5 years, you know I am pizza obsessed. I have been on a quest to figure out how you can make incredible restaurant-style pizza at home. But most of that journey has revolved around Neapolitan-style pizza, the original form of pizza, which is not what this is right here. This is New York-style pizza, the state that I live in, and an incredibly delicious form of pizza, which has been my recent obsession. And through recipe testing and learning about this style of pizza, I think it's incredibly fascinating how we ended up from this style to this right here. So we're gonna be learning all about the history of pizza today, and then I'll show you my super tuned in method and recipe for making New York style pizza, either in a pizza oven or in a home oven. And at the end of this video, I'll answer the question, what style do I prefer? And we're gonna start off with the dough. Now this is one of the biggest differences from Neapolitan to New York. Neapolitan dough has the highest hydration pizza dough, whereas New York dough has a lower hydration dough, which means less water per gram of flour, or in layman's terms, a drier dough. And by lowering the hydration, you get a dough that doesn't quite puff up as much in the oven. It also is slightly chewier, it can be a little crispier, and it's tricky to pinpoint exactly why the hydration lowered when it immigrated over from Italy, but I think there's a few main culprits. Number one, I think, is the Industrial Revolution. Bakers in New York had these big electric mixers. In general, it's just easier to make a big batch of dough at a lower hydration versus having to work a really high hydration dough by hand. And number two is once you have that lower hydration dough, it's much easier to roll out a big New York style pie, which you can actually slice up into individual pieces that each retain structure that can be taken to go. Not to mention that structural piece of the pizza can also be reheated easily. Whereas a Neapolitan pizza, you eat that thing fresh with fork and knife. It's much too delicate to be reheated and taken to go as a slice. So to make this dough at home, we're gonna lower the hydration. So I've been teaching you the Neapolitan style at say 65, 75% hydration. We're gonna take that down at least 10%. I really like the 60% hydration level if you're using a white flour. And speaking of flours, both regular all-purpose and bread flour will work great for this recipe. That higher protein level, the bread flour, will get a little bit more gluten structure involved, so it will be easier to stretch, but it's a minor difference. And you don't need a stand mixer, but like I said before, since it is a lower hydration dough, it's nice to use a stand mixer rather than hand kneading. So I'm gonna start off with 1,000 grams of flour. I'm going in with 2% salt, which is 20 grams of salt, 1 teaspoon of yeast, which I will just measure out since it's so light and doesn't come up on the scale easily. And to get that 60% hydration, since we're using 1,000 grams of flour, we're simply gonna be adding 600 grams of water. And I'll start up that mixer on a low speed. Now the second biggest difference between these pies is the addition of olive oil in New York doughs. And I used to add olive oil to all of my pizza dough. I just thought that's what you did. Those were the recipes I saw growing up. And then of course I learned how to make traditional Neapolitan pizza with Vito, and he said no olive oil. And the reason for this is that when you're cooking a Neapolitan pizza in a super high temperature wood oven, it bakes so fast that it retains a lot of that moisture in the dough because it's cooking in like 2 minutes. Whereas New York style pizza cooks at a lower temperature, so an addition of some olive oil will keep that dough just a little bit moist rather than drying out in the oven. So while this dough is slowly mixing up, I'm gonna add in 2% olive oil, or 20 grams of olive oil, and just let that incorporate in, which I will say thank you to Charlie Anderson. He put out a great video working with the Pizzaiola, which I'm stealing this olive oil incorporation tip from. So we're gonna give that an initial mix for about 2 minutes. Then I like to just let this sit, let that gluten rest, and then I'll start up the mixer again for another 5 minutes. And once that dough is done mixing, I'll pop that out on the board, and I like to just give it a few stretches on the board just to kind of bring everything together, but it's still a little bit rough now. So I'll let that sit for another 30 minutes, and then I'll do a final stretching. You can see it's a lot smoother now, and then it's ready to bulk ferment. I love these Cambro jars. I pop that in there, and you can see exactly when this is doubled in size by volume. And with just 1 teaspoon of baker's yeast, which is a pretty low amount, it's gonna take at room temperature, I would say anywhere between 3 and 4 hours to double in size. And when it does double in size, I'll remove it from the container, cut up my dough balls, and really the size you make them depends on on your pizza peel. It depends on your pizza oven or whatever you're baking it on. I'm cutting these dough balls around 250 to 275 grams, which will give me 6 dough balls total, which I'll pop on an oiled baking sheet and just add a little bit of oil to the top of the dough so they don't dry out. And then I'll throw a wet towel over them. And I like to throw these in the fridge overnight for a nice long and slow cold fermentation to really develop the flavor of the crust. All right, let's talk about the sauce, which I find in New York is definitely the biggest variable when it comes to different pizza places. It really comes down to the specific preference of the pizza place, the type of canned tomato product that they trust and love. Some people swear by just Italian imported tomatoes. Some places will add a lot of aromatics to their sauce or they'll spice it up. I think the sauce is where you have the most wiggle room. For me, I grew a lot of tomatoes, as you can see over there, this year. And for the first time, I really made an effort to grow sauce-specific tomatoes, like Romas or San Marzanos, which I've been collecting over the last few weeks. I've been letting them ripen to perfection on my table. And outside of the San Marzanos and the Romas, I'm also gonna be using some of these Campari tomatoes, which are great for sauce as well. And this is about 5 pounds total of tomatoes. And what I'm gonna do is throw them all in some boiling water for about 1 to 2 minutes until the skins just crack a bit. And then I'll throw them right in some cold water, which makes it super easy for those skins to just peel off nicely. Now I smashed about 4 cloves of garlic. This is the only aromatic I am using for this sauce. I got that just gently infusing in some hot olive oil. And after about 3 minutes, I went in with all of those tomatoes. And the reason tomato sauce is made with these types of tomatoes is one, because of their flavor, but also they have a much lower water content. But you can still see here, they release a good bit of water. So I'm gonna cook these down for about an hour. So I popped that in the blender, blended it up nice and smooth. It went back into the pot. I added my salt to season and just cooked it for about 15 more minutes until it hit that perfect tomato sauce consistency.
Oh, tomato sauce on the white shirt. Why am I wearing a white shirt?
Now let's talk about the cheese, which of course is the most obvious visual difference between Neapolitan and New York pizza. One has chunks of fresh mozzarella, the other has a nice even coating of shredded mozz. And I'm guessing the reason it took on this form is because when it immigrated over to the US, it was obviously much harder to obtain this amazing fresh buffalo style mozzarella that you would get in Italy. Of course, we had that industrial processed cheese. And the original pizzas that you saw made in New York, they were still placing on the mozzarella, but it was low moisture slices of it like this, still mimicking a closer similarity to a Neapolitan pizza. And then at some point, I have no idea when or why, the standard became the shredded low moisture mozzarella. Now, if you are trying to recreate a New York pizza, it is very important to get this lower moisture mozzarella. You can see I have 2 forms right here. Actually, Trader Joe's here in the US, they make a great low moisture mozzarella, perfect for New York pizza. This mozzarella here, you can see it says lower moisture. It's a bit tricky with the marketing here, but this is still a little bit too wet for a classic New York pie. So I'm gonna take this low moisture, dense mozzarella right here and just run it through the grater for that fresh shredded mozz. All right, next day. This I can tell is holding its structure. It still has a little bit of yeast left. Actually, I think it could even sit out of the refrigerator for a half hour or maybe an hour while the oven preheats. And that's exactly what I'm gonna do. So time to preheat the oven. And the first step, I like taking a little tin like this, kind of like you would see at a pizza shop. Fill that up with your flour. You could totally use a semolina, a fine semolina, really just preference. I find flour is good for New York style pizza because you're cooking at lower temperatures. So it's not gonna burn as much, whereas semolina is great for that super high temp Neapolitan pizza. And the dough just slightly came up to temperature. It proofed just a little bit more, and I'm gonna dunk it right in there. Don't hold back on the flour at this point. point. Full coating. Pop that on. Definitely start with that crust formation, but I'm not going for the thickness of a Neapolitan crust. A little thinner on the New York pizza. Flip it over, start pulling a little bit. Structure looks good. And then here's where I'll start just letting gravity take over. And that's the beauty of a lower hydration dough. It's not as fragile as a Neapolitan higher hydration dough. Still gotta be gentle, but we've got pretty good gluten structure here. Oops. See, like it can do that and go right back to normal. Okay, it's getting pretty thin. All right, I like that. Since it's a bigger pie, I'm gonna flour this a little bit and build it right on here. You can see that was pretty much perfect size for my peel. Now this is quite simple. We take our San Marzano sauce, just one big scoop, and we just circle it on there. Obviously the sauce to cheese ratios are completely up to you. When it comes to the sauce, I think a good ratio is when you can see through in some areas like this. And then we've got our shredded mozz and just an even coating. Again, how much cheese you want, up to you. I don't want this oozing with cheese. Still needs that nice balance. Whereas a lot of, say, pizza shops are just gonna dump it on because their ingredients aren't as good. We want everything to be in perfect balance so we can taste it all. That's ready to go outside. So I've got my Gosniark preheated, not sponsored. I just love this grill. It's propane, so we can get that nice even temperature versus wood fire, which is all over the place, much harder to maintain. And I'm about 650 closer to the fire, 600 on the other side. That temperature will drop when I get the pizza in there. And now that it's preheated, I'm gonna lower that top flame a little bit. It doesn't need so much broiling power from the top. Pizza going in. Slides right in, no problem. Now this is still hot, so the pizza will cook quick, but not like a Neapolitan dough. And I find that sort of 600 to 650 mark, it's a good balance where you can get a slightly longer bake, but you still get a really nice puff like this. That oven spring. Oops, we got some wind. Don't want that. Oh no, flame went out. It's all right. It's always harder when you're filming. And once it starts puffing up, I'm just gonna start rotating it. Let the other side puff up and just keep rotating to get that nice even brown on the crust. And now that that's even, I'm just gonna hit a hot spot in the back to brown up the bottom of the crust. And that should be good. I mean, looks pretty good to me. Let's check the crust. Nice browning under there, super crispy. Let's bring it in. Look at that thing. You can see this is distinctly New York looking pizza. You've got the thinner crust, you've got a little bit of grease, and a lot of people think New York pizza is just a greasier product, but that separation in the cheese is happening from a longer cook time in the oven. Under crust, you still have air bubbles, but not as fluffy as a Neapolitan pizza. It's so simple, yet it's such a distinct flavor and experience. I understand why Dave Portnoy can do the one bite review. Because of the uniformity, that first bite really hits you hard, where it's a Neapolitan pizza, I feel like you gotta finish at least a whole slice. If I'm judging myself, my execution and the taste, I'm giving that a 9-2. All right, here's round 2 when I wasn't filming. I think that was a better shot. So that's how I make New York pizza in a pizza oven, but not everyone has pizza ovens, and the beautiful thing about New York pizza is that you can make incredible pies in your home oven because it cooks at a slightly lower temperature. The key is having a pizza steel. This I find is by far the best way to get a nice crispy crust and an even heat. So what I'll do is I'll get my pizza steel preheating at 550 degrees for at least 30 minutes, and I'll get my pizza cooking. All right, check this out. It's only been 6 minutes. So it cooks a little bit longer. I mean, come on, my friends. That's insane. Look at the crispiness levels. All right, so this is pizza from the oven. Pizza oven, nearly identical. One thing I didn't mention is the addition of basil. For New York pizza, you've got 3 options. No basil, like this, sprinkled on, cooked in, like this, or sprinkled on fresh after, like this. Ultimately, it's your preference. Whereas, of course, with Italians, tradition overtakes everything and you have no preference. This is insane, the difference here, or the lack of difference. Let me see if I can taste the difference. Look at the crust. Because we're cooking at a slightly lower temperature, it gets a little crispier, but that interior is slightly drier compared to the pizza oven, but small differences here. So what takes the crown? Italian Neapolitan style or New York style pizza? One thing that's for sure, pizza being one of the most popular foods in both cultures, you can learn a lot about the culture through It's pizza. Everything about this pie just screams American culture. I think New York style is a little easier to make with the lower hydration, with the lower temperature of the oven, which sometimes is great. It takes a lot of concentration to nail down a Neapolitan style pie. Also, the reheatability of New York style can't be beat. Anyone who's ever had takeout Neapolitan, it's a mess. It does not transfer well, it does not reheat well, whereas there's more structure to this. You throw this in the air fryer or your oven, it comes back to life and it's super crispy. So love it for that. It definitely reminds me a lot of my childhood. But overall, I think being such a pizza nerd, I think Neapolitan style pizza to me represents not only the original pizza, but almost the purest art form of pizza. When you're working with a higher hydration dough and such high temperatures and wood fire, it just takes so much skill to really master that. And to me, that challenge is where a lot of the reward actually comes from when I'm making that style of pizza. But if you're a pizza enthusiast, you gotta try both styles and choose for yourself.